In 2006, Blizzard announced the first new class to grace the world of Azeroth. This was to be no ordinary class, however, it was a hero class. Starting at level 55 as a soldier of the Lich King, you're shown the Scourge's power firsthand throughout the starter zone before breaking away and forging your own path following the battle for Light's Hope. And for Blizzard's first attempt at a new class, well, it couldn't have gone any better. To this day, Death Knight remains a popular main character for many players for so many reasons. But how did their life begin all the way back at the start of their first expansion? Because whilst having some similarities to how they are in retail these days, it's quite a different experience. I think the first thing that has to be said here is that Death Knights on launch during Wrath were, how can I put it, just a little bit overtuned. In fact, they were the most powerful any class has ever been throughout the history of WoW ever, and it's just not even close. People got gladiator ranks in blue gear during season 5, and others used cast random macros to turn their entire rotation into RNG and would still top everyone else on DPS. In PvE content, you could DPS or tank as Blood, Unholy or Frost, and they were just the best at everything. You could not go wrong any way that you played the Death Knight. It was just a choice of how much better you wanted to be compared to all these other non-hero classes. But in Wrath Classic, we are not playing on progressive patches. Our game is set to the final patch, 3.3.5. As such, Death Knights have been toned down considerably from their crazy launch state in all areas of content. Nevertheless, you still better believe DKs are going to be incredibly popular, and for good reason. So let's get into it and take a look at how the DK began their life in Wrath of the Lich King. Before we go on, I want to do a quick shout out to today's video sponsor, PUBG Mobile. PUBG Mobile is a free-to-play battle royale and has one of the largest player bases within the genre, with over 50 million active daily players. PUBG Mobile has a wide range of game modes for solo players, duos or full squads, ranging from the traditional battle royale format to weapon master, arcade, sniper training, team deathmatch and many more, all of which can either be done in the third or first person. There will be something new and interesting to check out every week if you are after variety. PUBG Mobile regularly teams up with huge well-known IPs to create amazing skins and customization options for your character and weapons. So far in 2022, collaborating with the likes of Jujutsu Kaisen, Baby Shark, Evangelion and Amazon's The Boys. Exclusive to the mobile is a brand new map released earlier this year, Livik, a smaller and fast-paced map aimed to get you into the action as soon as possible, either competing for the win or checking out various mini-games with up to 51 other players. Some of the features unique to this map are treasure maps that are dotted around the area. Finding them and beating others to chess will give you huge rewards. The UTV, a special vehicle designed to get across any terrain fast, whatever the conditions. And of course, zip lines. I think just about any game is better when you have zip lines. You can download PUBG Mobile from the link in the description below or the pinned comment. It would help the channel out if you enjoy what we make here, and hey, it's free, so why not? Big thanks to PUBG Mobile for the sponsor. Let's talk WoW. So usually here we would start off the video with what's new to the class baseline, but yeah, it's all new. There's a whole new class. So instead I'm going to go over how Death Knights play on the current patch. They have what I call a builder and spender type gameplay with a bit more depth to it than most, as they have two resources to track at the same time. Runic power first. This is your blue bar and it's generated through certain abilities which cost runes such as Icy Touch or Plague Strike. As with any class with a resource bar, there are times when you want to pull it to burst, but most of the time just make sure you aren't capping it by spending it on other abilities which cost runic power such as Death Coil or Frost Strike. Your second resource are runes, shown just under the runic power bar. By default there are 2 Blood, 2 Frost and 2 Unholy. Each of these will regenerate over a few seconds after having been spent, and some of your more powerful abilities can cost multiple runes such as Death and Decay, which cost 1 of each. Through certain talents, when runes regenerate, they will also become death runes. These are shown as purple and count for any rune. Overall, it's a bit of a juggling act between not capping out on your runic power, making sure that your runes are in a state of regeneration, and not having huge portions of downtime in your rotation by overusing certain types of runes. Practice through leveling will go a long way to understanding and getting a good grip of this system. Death Knights also have presences, which are kind of like stances, though in Wrath, DKs didn't quite have their talent talent trees fully tied down to one identity. As such, each presence is, well, very different from how it is now in retail. Blood is the go-to DPS presence, which makes you do 15% more damage and heals you for 4% of damage done. This is mainly for PvE DPSing. Frost gives 8% stamina, 60% more armor contribution from items, and 8% less damage taken. Obviously, this is the tanking one. And Unholy gives you 15% attack speed and move speed, and reduces your global cooldown by half a second. This is mainly for PvP, though it's also great for dungeons or leveling. On top of this, Death Knights also had their own profession, rune forging, which allows them to apply special benefits to their weapons. The main powerful ones that you will see often are Rune of the Fallen Crusader, which gives you a proc that heals you for 3% health and a massive 15% bonus to strength for 15 seconds. This is DPS focused, of course. Razor Ice that applies a stacking debuff, causing the target to take extra weapon damage as frost and increasing the power of your frost-based attacks. And Stone Skin Gargoyle, giving some bonus defense and stamina. There's also quite a few niche use rune forges too, like Sword Shattering, giving extra parry chance and reducing the duration of disarms, or Spell Breaking that reduces the duration of silences on you. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what the baseline toolkit looks like for the DK in Wrath. On to raiding then. Let's start with tanking. So by the final patch of Wrath the Lich King, the one we're playing, Blood had really begun to fit into the tank niche, whilst Unholy and Frost were seen more as the DPS oriented specs for the new class. Though it wasn't till Cataclysm that Blood was formally made into the go-to tanking spec, so there is still some fun and experimentation to be had here. Whilst I'd say if you're tanking raids, just go Blood, it makes too much sense not to, I want to have a quick look at a Frost-centered tanking build just as an example of how flexible the DK talents really are. In the Blood tree, the main talents that I want to highlight are Bladed Armor. This is just going to give you a bunch more attack power and will scale up as your gear improves. Death Rune Mastery allows you to gain 2 death runes after casting a death strike, and that's a lot of death, which can then be used as any rune type. Rune Tap is just a nice short cooldown for some bonus health. Spell Deflection is an interesting one, gives you a chance equal to parry to reduce the damage from a direct spell by 45%. One of the reasons that DK tanks are so good in Wrath is they have so many tools to deal with heavy magic damage. This one is RNG, but if it's proccing, they're taking next to no damage. Finally, Abomination's Might is some bonus strength and 10% attack power for your raid. More of a flex pick this one, depends if your raid actually needs it or not. Other classes such as Enhancement Shaman or Marksman Hunters can also do this. In the Frost tree, I'm mainly going to talk about the points for tanking, as we're going to go over Frost DPS later, but Toughness is a bunch of armor and 30% reduction on slowing effects. Black Ice is important for threat generation for the DK. Lichborn isn't quite as useful in PvE as it is in PvP, but having the ability to immune certain effects whenever you want is nice. You can also Deathcore yourself for heals during this spell, which maybe would make a difference now and again. Frigid Dreadplate reduces the chance melee attacks hit you by a small amount, and Death Chill is a guarantee crit on frost spells, which is good on a pull for snap threat. Icy Talons and improved Icy Talons is just a no-brainer for both raid-wide utility as well as the personal bonus, reducing the target's attack speed by 20% and giving your entire raid 20% melee haste and you a further 5%. Improved Frost Presence will be taking for the damage reductions. Blood in the North converts a further 2 abilities into death rune generators. Usually DK specs don't have 2 separate talents that do this, so you're going to be swimming in runes as this spec. Unbreakable Armor is a short 1-minute cooldown, increasing armor by 25% and strength by 20% for 20 seconds. A huge bonus, big uptime, helps on those scary pulls, what's not to like here. Finally, Acclamation gives a stacking spell resist buff that can help out even more on spell damage heavy encounters. Overall, this is a twist on the traditional DK tank, a 2-handed frost rune generating machine that has tons of counters for casters. However, most of the time when DK tanks are considered, they are going to be some variation of Blood. This spec of course also uses a 2-hander, DKs don't need no shield, and they have the best single target threat generation too, as late in Wrath the Lich King, Blizzard gave Icy Touch a massive threat modifier, and unlike many other tanks, Blood feels much more in control and has a massive toolkit of self-heals. I suppose I have to mention here, but what about Blood as a DPS spec? That worked in original Wrath, right? Well, yes, it did in original Wrath at the start when DKs were busted. I think the best way I can put it is it would be like turning up to a raid in TBC as a Warlock playing a Felguard. You can still clear the raid, you're still going to do decent damage, but destruction will beat it every single time with the same group and gear. You can put points into Blood as a DPS and try it out, but don't really expect great things. I did a video not so long ago where I talk about all the weird and wonderful specs of Wrath if you want to check it out though. Also, if I tried to cover every variation of DK that could potentially work, the video would be way too long. So anyways, Blood tank, let's talk about that. Here's an example of a spec. Blade Barrier decreases damage taken by 5% when blood runes are on cooldown. This one should have a very good uptime when tanking. Veteran of the Third War is just a big old pile of stats to improve your combat performance. Mark of Blood is a bit of a weird one. I think a lot of people wouldn't take it, but it has niche uses, particularly on bosses that are constantly AoEing the raid or when they attack very fast. Either way, I think one of the things that makes Blood as a tank so fun is how many cooldowns they have access to, so I'd be taking it either way. Hysteria is a big selling point too. It's power infusion, but better, but for melee classes. 20% bonus damage for 30 seconds is such a massive buff, so good luck trying to convince your tank to give it to you. Improved Death Strike does what it says on the tin, makes the ability much better, though unlike retail, Death Strike doesn't heal depending on how much damage you've taken recently, it just does a flat amount plus a bonus for each disease on the target. Vampiric Blood is another short 1-minute cooldown that boosts the Death Knight's max health and increases healing taken by 35%. A great ability to combo with damage spikes in conjunction with your many ways to heal. Will of the Necropolis is just a bunch of flat damage reduction when you hit low health, and the final talent taken here is in Heart Strike, which is like an upgraded Blood Strike, which also does a bit of cleave. The final three talents are really more focused towards DPS increases, which does translate to threat increases, but going into the Frost tree instead for the likes of improved Icy Talons and just generally amping up the power of your Icy Touch is just better. Nevertheless, for the sake of completion and going over everything in the tree, these talents are Might of Mograine and Blood Gorged. Both of these give you plenty of extra damage into your rotation, and the final ability in the tree is Dancing Rune Weapon, which on the final patch just isn't terribly exciting anymore. It's only on a 1-minute cooldown and it copies the Death Knight spells but for 50% reduced damage. This ability used to scale with how much runic power was spent on it and would copy everything you do, like literally everything, for the same damage as the Death Knight was doing, and it was one of the main reasons that Blood worked as a DPS class early on. For tanks, Blood DKs will use glyphs such as Disease, Vampiric Blood for better uptime on this ability, and Dark Command, so your taunt actually works. Moving across in the DPS trees then, let's start with Frost. In Wrath, Frost is a dual-wielding, fast-paced DPS spec that counts on procs for huge crits through its talents. As per usual with the DK, there's a good deal of flexibility for the talents. Starting early game, expect to be using a Blood sub-spec, picking up Bladed Armor, as well as Dark Conviction for bonus crits. Though later on, you should be moving over to an Unholy one instead. In the Frost tree, Nerves of Cold Steel are vital if you're dual-wielding for the extra damage and hit chance. Annihilation is mandatory, making it so Obliterate no longer consumes diseases on the target. Killing Machine is part of the proc-based gameplay, giving melees a chance to guarantee a crit on your next Frost ability. Glacier Rot is just a nice bit of bonus damage, not too much to say about that. Merciless Combat is your execute modifier in your rotation, 12% bonus damage from your main abilities against targets under 35% health. Rhyme is the second part of your proc-based gameplay, a 15% chance after Obliterate to make Howling Blast reset its cooldown and be free. Threat of Thessarian is the other reason you care about dual wielding when you're Frost, causing your offhand to deal damage at the same time. Guile of Gorefiend is there to add a bunch more damage to your big spells, and Frost Strike is your runic power spender for this tree, instantly attacking with both weapons for frost damage, of course bypassing all armor. Thunderstalker is just more damage against targets with Frost Fever and a bunch of expertise, and your final talent point will be put into Howling Blast, a short cooldown powerful AoE hitting all enemies nearby hard. Add some procs on top of this and you can really start to delete enemies. Frost DKs can put out some of the best short-term AoE bursts with a bit of luck. Frost uses glyphs such as Disease, Frost Strike to reduce the cost of this ability, and of course Obliterate for some big damage gains. The second DPS spec for DKs to consider is Unholy. This is the spec that can quite literally do everything. Well, apart from tank, that is. In fact, it probably could on easier content. Anyways, it's great at leveling, you get a ghoul pet, it's amazing in PvP and PvE. Unholy just overall is a beast of a spec, but we're going to start with the PvE side of things again. As per it was with Frost, there is an earlier game build and a later one, though it's quite a similar tale. The Blood sub-spec is expected to perform a little better earlier, and the Frost one later. Also, normally Unholy would use a two-hander, however, whilst I was checking over DK information to see if anything crazy had happened in however many years fan servers have existed for Wrath, there was also some talk about a dual-wield spec as well for Unholy, though there wasn't a huge amount of changes from the talent trees we're about to look at, and one of the main benefits was being able to use Cinder Glacier as a rune forge to empower some abilities, but it could be something new which we see grow in popularity during the expansion. But for the time being, I'm just going to cover the traditional Unholy PvE spec, as not too much is known about this yet. Virulence is a great spell for hit chance it gives. Mobility, a bit lower down, is also great since it increases the power of mainly Death Coil, but also reduces the cooldown on death and decay. Ravenous Dead amps up the power of your ghoul and allows it to be a little more tanky. Further down the tree, Necrosis adds a bunch of shadow damage on top of your auto attacks. Blood Cake Blade gives an on-hit chance to add a bunch of extra damage, scaling with diseases. Next to that, Knight of the Dead and Master of Ghouls turn your temporary pet into a permanent one with its own set of abilities. It's more worth talking about for PvP, as in PvE you kinda just have it hit whatever you're doing and that'll be fine. Back in the talents, Impurity gives your spells better scaling. Desolation adds a flat 5% damage buff at all times, more or less. Bone Shield is an active ability in Wrath which works a bit differently too. On a 1-minute cooldown, it causes you to take 20% less damage and deal 2% more damage as well. Crit Fever and Ebon Plaguebringer by themselves are already good reasons to bring an Unholy DK. This essentially makes your diseases passively apply Curse of Elements to the target, and you can spread this to all of the nearby targets easily via Pestilence. Very good talent here. Wandering Plague is why Unholy starts to really scale with AoE. A chance equal to your crit for your disease ticks to be an AoE hit is absolutely huge. Scourge Strike is the big new spender ability, dealing a whole bunch of physical damage as well as some shadow damage. Rage of Rivendare towards the bottom of the tree is just a bunch of extra damage once again. And finally, your last talent point will be spent in Summon Gargoyle, a powerful 3-minute cooldown that will deal very high damage to your main target, and of course it will scale with your active buffs. Unholy uses glyphs such as Dark Death for more damage, Icy Touch for the same reason, and Ghoul to make your pet scale even better. So now we've had a talk through the specs in PvE, how do we think Death Knights are going to perform overall throughout Wrath? The answer is very, very well. Usually when a class has multiple DPS specs, they start with one at the beginning of the expansion and then swap to the other later as it begins to outscale it. Death Knights don't do this. You will happily have both a Frost and an Unholy DK in your raid from day one to the end of the expansion. It's not even bad to have more than one of either spec too. Both DPS specializations perform very well, with Unholy caring more about stacking raw strength for scaling, while Frost is expected to go the route of armor pen eventually. The only potential problem is if this dual wield Unholy spec becomes meta, then there suddenly is way more competition on one-handers. Still, your Ret and Fury warriors are going to be happy about it, aren't they? As for tanking as Blood, you are also super happy to have one of them in the raid at all times. They're very self-sufficient. They offer a ton of utility through being able to spec into 20% melee haste and 10% attack power. They give a physical DPS hysteria. They have the best bar non-single target threat. Expect to see many 25-man lineups take a Blood DK and a Prot Pala as the standard tanking duo. Also, it kind of goes without mentioning really, but this is the new class. As of making this video, there are currently 0 Death Knights in the game, and raids will want at least 3. The demand will be there. You can bet there's going to be competition for sure. The class is popular for a reason. It's awesome, this expansion. But I can't see picking a DK as a main or an alt ever being a bad choice at anything in PvE. Or PvP for that matter. So let's move on and talk about that, shall we? So first, really, I just want to start by touching on Frost as a potential PvP spec, but very briefly. It's got great burst and a nasty setup with Hunger and Cold providing an AoE hard CC on only only a 1 minute cooldown, but after people trinket that hungering cold or it wears off, you find yourself playing a DK with much less survivability and consistent damage than your Unholy counterpart, which is why I've decided to focus on Unholy for this. Because Unholy just has so much to be said about it for PvP. But let's check out the talents, then I'll go over the bits we missed out when we were talking PvE. Unholy command lowers the cooldown on Death Grip a little bit. It's an incredibly powerful ability to either interrupt or just disrupt your enemy's positioning. Corpse Explosion is a bit optional, but you can consider it for a little bit of extra burst when you're going for that all-in. Unholy Blight is super good, causing Deathcore to apply a dot and making all diseases undispellable on the target for 10 seconds. Desecration is another vital talent, causing Plague Strike and Scourge Strike to put a 50% slow area on the floor. Imagine if Frost Trap was spammable off melee abilities. That's kind of what this talent is. Pretty soon after an Unholy DK connects on a target, the whole area around a pillar is just a permanent slow field. Magic Suppression makes anti-magic shield even better than it already is, on top of just reducing magic damage by a small amount. But what if you could extend this bonus to your team as well? Well, you can with Anti-Magic Zone, reducing 75% of incoming magic damage up to a certain cap for you and your party members only on a 2-minute cooldown. Improved Unholy Presence is really just for making your runes come off cooldown a little bit faster. Over in the Frost Tree, Lichborn is taken to immune fears or self-heal a little, and Endless Winter removes the runic power cost of Mind Freeze, which is another fantastic quality of life. Unholy DKs are one of the highest pressure classes in the game, with amazing offensive and defensive toolkits, with the likes of Anti-Magic Shield, Anti-Magic Zone, Icebound Fortitude, Death Pact, Strangulate, Pet Stun, Death Grip, and more. Glyph-wise, Unholy DKs use Dark Death for more damage, Ghoul for extra scaling, and Disease for the utility. Expect to see Unholy DK across a wide variety of comps, maybe as part of a dot focus team with Affliction locks, or most notably part of Holy Pala, Arms Warrior, Unholy DK, or more commonly known as TSG. So let's finish up on some tier sets then, starting off in tier 7, the Scourge-born Battle Gear. Hey look, it's tier 7 where Blizzard had no tier 3 to copy from, and you know what? They still absolutely smashed it with this tier set. This is my favourite Death Knight set they've ever made. The tier 7 25 Recolor is just bliss. Add an Armageddon on top of it and that is the DK look for me. That is how they should be. Set bonus wise, there's one made for DPSing and one made for tanking, but throughout Wrath of the Lich King, DKs didn't really have a defined this spec is supposed to do this role, so all the sets kind of benefit all the specs in one way or another. The DPS 2 set increases crit chance of Obliterate, Scourge Strike, and Death Strike by 5%, and the 4 set makes those abilities generate 5 extra runic power. Not half bad as far as tier 7 sets go, it's going to add a little bit to your overall. For tanks, the 2 set increases the crit chance of Plague Strike by 10%, and the 4 set increases the duration on Icebound Fortitude by 3 seconds. This is pretty underwhelming as far as tier set bonuses go and changes the class very little. Tier 8, the Dark Runed Battle Gear from Ulduar. For DPS, the 2 set increases the crit chance of Death Coil and Frost Strike by 8%, and the 4 set adds a further 20% bonus damage per disease for abilities that scale with them. Overall, a notably larger DPS increase than tier 7 would have been, though not really doing anything to change the way you play the game. For tanks, the 2 set is an increase to damage on Rune Strike, and the 4 set is Anti-Magic Shield, also grants you 10% reduced physical damage taken. Again, like tier 7 for the tanks, doesn't seem very good bonus wise. Rune Strike works how Overpower does for warriors, but it's on next melee and it generates bonus threat. As for Anti-Magic Shield, it's something you want to use on magic damage. If there's no magic damage on a fight, will a 10% DR make that much difference? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Tier 9 from Trial of the Crusader is called Tira or Thessarian's Battle Gear. For the 2 set, you can proc 180 strength for 15 seconds. This is apparently a 50% proc chance with a 45-second internal cooldown, which is okay. The ICD is kind of long though. The 4 set means Blood Plague can crit. Hey, that's pretty good, especially for Unholy. When you're on cleave heavy fights, that will start to add up. For tanks, the cooldown on Dark Command, that's your taunt, is reduced by 2 seconds, and Blood Strike and Heart Strike deal 5% bonus damage. The 4 set reduces the cooldown on Unbreakable Armor, Vampiric Blood, and and Bone Shield by 10 seconds. Finally, tier 10 from Icecrown Citadel, the Scourge Lord's battle gear. This is actually a close rival to tier 7 in the looks department for me, especially the 25 heroic set with the helm that looks like the Spire of ICC. Super cool design, really like that. For DPS, the 2 set is just a bunch more damage on your entire rotation pretty much. It certainly adds up even if it's not terribly exciting, and the 4 set makes it so when all your runes are on cooldown you gain 3% more damage for 15 seconds. This will alter how you play a little bit, and you'll want to make sure that you're maintaining that buff as much as possible. For tanks, the 2 set is 20% more damage on death and decay. Death Knight AoE threat is okay, but it could certainly be improved, so it's not bad in that regard. The 4 set is a 12% damage reduction for 10 seconds when you use Blood Tap. This ability is only on a 1-minute cooldown to begin with, so a nice extra little damage reduction for the DK to fit in their cooldown heavy kit. So now that we've had a look through the Death Knight in their launch expansion at Blood, Frost, Unholy, PvE, PvP, tier sets and more, can we really give an answer to what to expect from choosing a Death Knight in Wrath? I think you should expect nothing short of an amazing experience. It's true that they have been massively nerfed from their launch state, but they had to be. But calling DK's nerf makes it sound as though they're bad or something. This cannot be further from the truth. Each of the DK specs excels in at least one area of content. I'd say Unholy does the most things well between PvP, PvE and leveling. Its main advantages are in PvP though, so if you don't care too much about that side of the game, literally any DK spec is a good choice for Wrath. Look, they're even called a hero class. They start at a higher level than everyone else, and they remain to this day, for very good reason, one of the most well-remembered parts of World of Warcraft's most successful expansion ever. So in short, DKs and Wrath, they're pretty damn good. That is it for Death Knight, so let me know your thoughts, whether you played one back in original Wrath or this will be your first spin with the OG Death Knight. As always guys, thank you so much for watching and listening in, and I shall see you all on the next one very soon.